so much for tuning into The Journey with Christian DeEvans podcast, as well as we've got an incredible guest, Chief Investment Officer at Pax Fortis, Andrew Morale, and the one and only Ron Diamond with Diamond Wealth Strategies. Guys, we're going to be talking a lot about stuff with like Donald Trump, Kamala Harris. The debate was last night. We're going to be diving into that, the economic policies, but also obviously just our stance on what we felt after watching the amazing debate. We're also going to be talking about why there's a huge massive tax on the success and on the wealthy and those that are going out there and performing. And this incredible stuff where, hey, they're going to tax unrealized gains and the devastating effect that's going to happen to the economy. And, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. We're going to also be talking about Google is being sued again. And so we want to dive into that a little bit. Ron, Andrew, how you guys doing? Awesome. Well, Ron, I look forward to our conversation. I want to go to you, Ron, real quick. Really just get your thoughts on the debate last night. Kamala and Trump had an amazing debate, 2 hours. There was no audience there. There was a lot of dynamics. It was interesting to see how they both kind of, engaged. One of the things you mentioned offline that we were talking about, it was a lot of theater. And I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about your perspective on what you saw last night, man.
My perspective is that she eviscerated him last night. She kept baiting him, and he kept falling for the bait. And it was, to me,
could you elaborate a little bit further? Were there certain topics specifically that you felt like she eviscerated him, or was it like just the whole debate itself?
Almost everything. It was almost like she was like toying with him like a child, and she knew exactly what his hot buttons are. And look, all he had to do is just focus on, when I was president, here's the economy, and just focus on the statistics, right, on the facts. And if he did, it would have been a different debate. But she was able to bait him into getting things, and she used his insecurity, his lack of his ego, in order to win arguments, which he very easily could have won that debate if all he had to say was, "What have you done in the last 4 years?" And he didn't.
Yeah, Andrew, I'd like to get your perspective on what you saw a little bit.
It was more theater than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with that kind of synopsis of the theater. I think it was political in nature. It was the height of political debate that we have in our country right now, where it's I think everyone just wanted to say, let's talk about policies, what's going to happen. I spoke with several people that aren't super up to date on policies, maybe haven't read their kind of stances on things, and they were similarly frustrated, where it's like, this is name calling, this is kind of mudslinging. Like, can we just talk about what's going to happen in the U.S. for the next 4 years and keep that the center of the debate? And I agree with Ron that that's not what it was. I think a lot of folks that maybe haven't been following politics very closely have this assumption that Kamala is not as, I think she can come off as though she's not super sharp, or she kind of says like boilerplate items. But when it gets down to it, and as we saw last night, she's super articulate, very well educated. And so I was impressed by her and her responses. I do think that she baited him into some answers that became more emotional than statistical. And so, yeah, it was definitely an interesting conversation that I think missed the mark for what most people were hoping would come out of it, which is a true discussion on where we're going, the policies that are going to be implemented. Because there's a lot of stuff like what we're going to talk about today that weren't covered, right? It was very much a theater of, kind of opinions and personalities and things like that versus hard facts, where I wish that we could get back to, okay, here's the 10 things I'm going to do on my agenda when I get into the office, and this is how they're going to work, and that kind of stuff versus kind of name calling or mudslinging.
And I also would add, these are not two good candidates. We could do a lot better than either one of these candidates. So the fact that these are our choices, to me, is very sad.
And it's sad because I feel like we've been saying that for many years in a row, is this really who we're having to choose from? Ron, where do you think I was this yesterday and the day before, I was out in LA with a group of just the business leaders. It's the All In Summit. There's a lot of high end people there, and like why where's the disconnect between getting leaders in tech, Peter Thiel, Sergey Brin, like why can't we get some of these high quality business individuals to run in the political realm? Is it too toxic, or is it the pay isn't good enough? How do you think we solve that? Because it's time and time again, every 4 years we're going, is this really what we have to choose from?
So yes and yes. It's very toxic. I don't know why somebody would want to be the president of the United States today with social media. And I think that it has nothing to do with pay because these people have multi-billions of dollars. The question is, would they really want to do it? And I thought Michael Bloomberg would have been a great president. And he got eviscerated by Elizabeth Warren over 45 seconds and his campaign died. And he's just not used to being spoken to like that. And, so he's not a politician, which I think is a good thing. I think he would have made a great president. I think Romney would have made a great president. But the way this system is structured, the parties, the Democratic and the Republican parties, I think it's a flawed model. And I don't think we can have an independent yet. We're not ready for that. But I would have.
Yeah, and I want to loop back on something, Ron. You have a very interesting perspective on Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, because you've actually previously, before he was president, you've invested alongside him once, and you've had some synergistic relationships with him. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit of just about, your working experience with him a little bit.
Well, I don't want to go into details, and it wasn't a direct investment that I did with him, but I will say that a lot of the people who who are voting for Trump, and again, his policies, most of his policies, certainly economic policies, I completely agree with. I think they're much more sound and make much more sense than Kamala Harris's. The problem, and it kind of goes back to the family offices, family offices, like the first, second, third thing, if somebody's going to work with somebody, they want to know is, can they trust the person? And the fourth thing is, what's their track record? If you truthfully asked a lot of the people who are voting for Trump, and again, I agree with more of his policies than Kamala's policies. But if you ask them, would you invest in a blind pool with him as a GP? And they answered honestly, I can't see one person who would say yes. So I think that there's a question of, integrity. And I think that people are just sick and tired of just bringing everybody down and making everything divisive. If it's just a question of policies and he doesn't bring his personality into this, it's a completely different situation.
I really enjoy Trump, and I enjoy his economic policies, but also I like what he stands for on a social side of things as well. And one of the things that I've looked at, if you looked at the Republican National Convention during that week, it was interesting because you had all these other attack dogs that were attacking the Biden administration for Trump, and then Trump could sell the vision. And that's what I wish he would have done a little bit last night, where he didn't have to attack Kamala. Kamala and the Biden administration, they've kind of failed over the last 3.5 years on numerous points. And he didn't have to attack that. He would have just sold the vision to the American people and said, hey, this is where we're going. This is what's happening. You've already experiencing the inflation, seeing all these illegal immigrations coming in, all this stuff happening, Iraq, pullout. I mean, there's all these, situations. So if he would have done that and reframed it a little bit better, and, that January 6th question always comes up, and he's never fully prepared for it. And it's sad to see how he's like, you got to have like some sort of preparation and some sort of prepared statement so that he can attack that straight on instead of just keep defending it, whatever, because it just doesn't sound right. Well, it's a very interesting. I think there's a way of reframing it, but I don't think he's been properly prepared to do that because it just never looks good on his resume, January 6th and the way it's been postured. I just think it could have, for the political use, it could be reframed differently, so that, of course, it's working for him, not against him. Because he's mentioned, of course, the way he said it last night was, look, you have January 6th. An insurrection, but then you also have 12 million people coming across the border on the southern border. So what's worse? And I don't think he was able to articulate that well enough last night. Well, that's what he said last night. So
That's
that's why I was just saying the
comparing
comparison
those
of
are
it.
different
I
animals.
wanted to loop just a little bit on this here, this policy here, because it's very interesting. I sent these articles to you. I'm going to read something here. I'd love to get your perspective on this. So the most recent example, this is a friend of mine, very good hedge fund, incredible guy. He's done very well for himself, and he wrote this article. The most recent example of government's true intention to punish success is the proposed imposition of annual wealth taxes on individuals who have committed no crime except they have been successful. In 8 jurisdictions, including California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Oregon, and Washington, legislative proposals have been introduced in 2023 which states represent about 60% of wealth in the U.S. Notice, wealth includes unrealized appreciation on assets. The taxation of unrealized appreciation has never been previously enacted in the U.S. Where these respective states propose differ in certain mechanical details, their overall goal is the same, to take annually from those who have been successful, thereby reducing their power and influence. So take California bill, and he dives into a little bit further. AB 259, which is the California bill. The bill would, for taxable years beginning on or after January 1st, 2026, impose an annual tax of 1% on residents' worldwide net worth in excess of 50 million or in excess of 25 million in the case of married taxpayers filing separately. If a California resident decides to move and permanently establish residence in another state, AB 259 will continue to apply to former residents for the next 4 years on fractional basis. This effectively imposing a punishment disclosure requirement. So basically what it's saying is like, hey, look, we're gonna tax you on unrealized gains, and that has really never happened here. And I wanted to get your perspective because, ourselves and our friends, this directly impacts the family office world. And it's crazy to see how that's actually coming through legislation, like you mentioned, in regards to numerous states. And I want to get your perspective on how that could hurt the economy, the economic policy of things, but also why in the world they think that's beneficial.
Well, I think it would be a huge mistake to do that. And I think they think it's beneficial because politically it seems good. I mean, the way the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and without a sustainable middle class, long-term societies can't sustain. So that's a fact. And so put that in a bucket. But look at it from the perspective of, from a business standpoint. If you truly understand business, yes, the wealthy are getting wealthier, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing, and you should be able to do that. And just to go out and tax people to do it is not the right solution. Now, politically, it might be popular for certain people to say that, but that's not the way to do it from a business standpoint. You need entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the backbone of the society, and that's what makes things grow. And if you stifle it and you just keep taxing everything they do, people won't have the incentive to go out and create what they're doing if they're going to be taxed for everything. So I personally think it's a huge mistake to do it. I don't think it's going to happen. I still think that they're running right now on elections. I think that what happens is politicians, when they get, if Kamala got elected, I think she would change her tune on this. But I
Andrew,
don't
I'd
know.
like to go to you,
And
man.
I think if she didn't, there'll be a huge mistake.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's the word asinine comes to mind, but as Ron said, it's never been done before. I think it would absolutely destroy the middle class even further. Um, I have a lot of friends that are not super wealthy. They bought a house, they scraped together to buy a house. The thought of being taxed on unrealized gains from, growth in the real estate industry or anything like that, it, I don't understand where you think that the money comes from. I mean, by its nature, it's an unrealized gain, right? If you think about, I think it also affects a lot of the young founders that have done a lot of hard work and grit to create a new company. Maybe it's in its Series C or D round. They haven't, exited with a bunch of money, but they've got a stock in maybe a billion or $500 million company to put the burden on them to pay the piper when they haven't even had, their day in the sun yet, I think is a huge mistake. And as Ron said, it takes away the drive and the motivation to be successful. My question to throw this back is, where is the underlying desire for this idea? And let's assume, I don't think it will happen either, because it's like lighting your foot on fire when your arms are already on fire with the deficit. But what is the underlying root behind this? Is it, well, gosh, we got to balance the budget and we have to pay for all of these things and we don't have, let's find another place to generate taxes from? Or is it more of a control power situation where I want less people empowered by themselves and I want more people to rely on the state and therefore the empowerment of the state? What do you think is the motivation? Let's assume, for the sake of this discussion, that this does get passed, or the thoughts of this getting passed. Is it power based? Is it financially based?
To me, it's mostly power based.
Yeah.
I think that these are politicians and they want what's on their agenda and they want to get elected. And I think that if you understand economics, you truly understand it, a lot of what policies that Trump has financially make a lot more sense than what Kamala's proposing. Having said that, by continually making everything so divisive and bringing everything down, it dilutes the message. So if it was just done on facts, if it was just, if they could only talk about policy and that's it, I think Trump would win in a landslide. But he's got some personality issues that caused him to go off script, and that's hurting him. And this should be a very easy thing for him to win if it's just based on the economy.
Yeah, it's interesting to see this because we are seeing how the social issues specifically in this race, that is becoming very, prevalent, and that will probably deter or determine the race in regards to the election, definitely for the independents. And I'm just curious, because we know individuals on both sides of the spectrum, and you and I were talking about offline a little bit where it's interesting. So we're seeing a lot of people definitely in Silicon Valley, California area. They are obviously very outspoken toward Trump right now. They are kind of putting a lot of their effort and their time, energy, and effort behind that before 2020 and before 2016, et cetera. And which is very interesting. We're also seeing more heavy hitters. Again, Kamala Harris, when she was running, before she started running and Biden stepped down, and then all of a sudden she was kind of the nominee, et cetera, she raised $200 million. So, I mean, that shows there's a lot of excitement, a lot of energy behind it. I am curious, again, we know some very similar friends and so forth. And like you and I, we all acknowledge, okay, on the economical standpoint, it would hurt us if we just go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris, which, this is a direct correlation to be like, it would hurt us, economically. But my question is do you feel like that they can stomach that more so than voting for Trump at this point and at this stage? Ron?
Look, I think that I'm an economist by trade. I've studied economics. I understand finance. I ran a hedge fund. I understand how the business world works. But I do think that there are some things that transcend money. And I think that we're at a situation where people look at who he is as a human being and just can't tolerate that. And that transcends the economic policies, which, in my opinion, his policies are far superior to Kamala's, but he just can't get over himself. And I just think that people are tired, and we have more in common than we have more things that are in common than are opposite. I'll give you a perfect analogy. My daughters went to sleepaway camp, and they have a green team and a white team. And the green team and white team, it's like a rivalry, and they're just like bitter rivals, whatever. But at the end of the day, when it ends, they still go to the same camp, right? And they're still able to communicate with each other. And I think that's almost a microcosm of what this is. I mean, the to demonize these people, other Americans, is not really the solution, right? We're all Americans. We all want to get this together. So I think if they went to the camp that my daughters went to when they were 10 and 12 years old, they could the whole party could learn from that, because they all went to the same camp, but same thing. We're all Americans.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put that. I went to a couple of those camps when I was younger, and you're right. It's this bitter rivalry, and it's competitive, and there's sports, but at the end of the day, you're still all campers, and there is a unity within that. And yeah, I think it goes back to your point of like, why are these our two choices? And because I think 9 out of 10 Americans want that. We want unity. We want the place to run well. We don't want to pay, $5 for gas and $6 for eggs. And, we all want to get along. But the divisive nature of things has eroded significantly in the last, call it 10 years, where there is this demonization of other sides, back and forth, left to right, right to left, where it's like, I can't even have a conversation with you. When I was at that conference this past week, it was really refreshing because we went to some of these roundtable discussions, and it was an hour, 2 hours of solid discussion. Here's my point, and here's my, my support of that. What do you think about it? Well, I like this. I disagree with that. Like, it was true discussion. And that has become something that's rare these days. And so if we can, I agree, if we can get back to this, I hear what you're saying, but have you thought about this? Oh, that's a good point. Versus you don't agree with me? Well, I can't be in the same room with you, and really the enemy nature of these two parties, which goes back. It's not a long-term solution. I mean, it's eroding the society.
Well, also remember, Roy Cohn is like Donald Trump's role model, right? And he believes ruling by fear. That's just it. I just don't believe.
The other thing is, I would just challenge on this premise a little bit,
and
I've had a conversation with numerous of my friends. It's like, I could sit here and have a conversation with a communist and say why capitalism is better than communism, but at the end of the day, it's a waste of my time. To me, I look at this and say, look, I'm going to execute amazing capitalism. I'm going to go out there and find jobs, create jobs, invest into amazing companies, and build other founders and so forth. And maybe communism, they'll say whatever they want to say. It's the same thing with the educational system. There's a lot of these conversations. I look at this and there's like, well, there can be amazing dialogue between Americans with different perspectives, and that's awesome. But also at the end of the day, you have to execute. And to me, once you already know the answer and you know what's actually good for America and you know what's successful, I think what I just read in regards to taxing unrealized gains, I look at this and I think this is one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of people jumping from the Democratic Party. They're going right after the wallet of these people, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of switch over to the Republican side, even though they may not agree with Trump on abortion, on maybe the way he says it, maybe even his character, whatever. But they're like, hey, look, this is going to hurt my financial status, and I don't want that to happen. And then also it is kind of gravitating into more of a socialistic society, which there are different parts of America that are very socialistic, if you will, handouts, et cetera, et cetera. However, though, there is a difference between socialistic programs versus a whole socialistic society. And I think there's that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this huge uptick to support behind Trump. And that's also one of the reasons, if you notice Kamala Harris versus Biden, Kamala Harris platform has drastically changed. No tax on tips, or I'm for the small business. I mean, even her opening statement was beautifully articulated.
But the way the political system works, first she's got to win a Democratic primary, and then she's got to go to move more to the center to win a general election. That's just
right. But the thing is, now the question is, you look at 3.5 years, she wasn't president, but she was working with a president there, that they've implemented these bills and this agenda that is very, very a left-leaning, extremely left-leaning. And so that's the concern of, okay, what is she going? She says one thing, but what is she going to walk in if she wins? What is she going to walk into the White House with? What's the agenda and what's her strategy? And I tend to think she's just going to, talk in the air, kind of a fart in the windstorm, and really nothing's going to stick in regards to what she's saying on the campaign trail. And I think that's one of the things that is.
Yeah, I think our country is centrist, right? We're either a little center right or a little center left. We're not these extremes. And these are two extremes, and that's not where our country is at. And the fact that these are our two choices, to me, is really sad, because our country is not really far left and it's not ultra conservative. It is, whether it's center left or center right, I'm not sure, but it is towards the center. And we do not have a candidate right now that represents the country.
Ron, you said something interesting in the beginning of this, how you said, I don't think that we're ready for an independent. And what you just said is, and yet, like most of the country believes in that. Why? Because I agree with you. I think it's rooted in the way the system is set up with two parties. But what changes to get us, quote, ready for an independent?
I don't know. That's a great question. There's too much money involved in both sides, and money, can corrupt. And both the Republicans and the Democrats, there's so much involved in the system. They're so entrenched in it that even though in theory many Americans might agree more with an independent candidate like a Michael Bloomberg, you can't win as an independent right now. There's just too much money involved, way too much money.
Yeah. Sadly, I agree.
I do want to look back on the AB 259 because I think this is so interesting, where you're taxing unrealized gains. And I want people to understand, first of all, realize is when you're investing in something and then you take the cash out of it, basically now you realized it. Unrealized is let's say you own a real estate property and you own it for the next 20 years and you don't sell that property. That's unrealized, right? And the value of it, and the appreciation of it. What they're talking about is Wealth Tax Advisory Council to determine an adequate level of annual funding and staffing for the administration and collection of the wealth tax imposed by this bill. So they can basically come in and look at this. And what I look at this is I relate it to like the EPA with farmers. So EPA can come in, regulate the farmers and say, hey, you're tax this, or there's some regulation or whatever it may be. And the farmers may not have any way of combating that. They can also, he talks in this amazing article, he says, the council would have the power to use existing law, the False Claims Act, which provides that if a taxpayer presents a false statement, the taxpayer could be subject to 3 times the amount of damages, penalties, and the cost of civil action brought to recover them, and may indeed involve the Attorney General and the plaintiff's bar. So I mean, you're talking legal action against us. It's not just typical like, oh man, a tax bill of some sort. You're talking, hey, if you don't fulfill on this and you try to find a way around this, then guess what? We're going to go after you. And I think that just shows to us, like, again, you're not incentivizing behavior. I always look at an incentive. It's the carrot or the stick. And which behavior are you incentivizing? Well, when you're sitting there and saying, you're successful, you go out there and you work your ass off, and then you're sitting there and you're taxing them and you may take legal action against them. That's not incentivizing the right behavior. That's one of the reasons why when you looked at the Trump administration, they did these opportunity zones. And that came from the South Carolina, one of the senators there, and he talks about, hey, look, we want to incentivize investors in specific areas throughout the U.S. Well, now all of a sudden it's a good tax advantage for them, and so guess what? They're going to write $1 million, $2 million check in those areas because guess what? It's going to look good on their taxes, and now it's incentivizing behavior. And then, of course, it's also good for those specific regions. And I'm really astounded. And why this is so scary to me is because before we think, oh, California and the New England states, they're kind of liberal anyways. They have crazy tax policy. But we're starting to see that kind of flood into other regions of the U.S. And I think that's why, give it 2 or 3 or 5 years, but it's just a matter of timing before, we start seeing that be pushed through. So I just wanted to, get your response on that, Ron, real quick. Well, specifically on the advisory tax, the tax advisory council, why, the devastating effect of that. And again, what my thought process was in regards to when you're creating these programs on a federal level, you want to incentivize these investors into good behavior.
It would be It would be a massive mistake. I mean, if you look at it on the surface, you know, people who are not educated from a financial standpoint, I could see where they think it makes sense because, but if you understand economics and you understand what drives people and what brings businesses, it's the entrepreneurs that do it, and that's the backbone of this economy. And if you stifle entrepreneurs, you'll just stifle investment, you'll stifle growth, and ultimately that'll trickle back to the middle class. So even though it won't directly impact
Andrew,
them,
you want to add anything there?
indirectly it'll impact them worse.
No, I just totally agree. I think building the middle class financially and stability is something that this country desperately needs. I think in the early 2000s, you had a much more robust middle class and consequently a better economy overall. And yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, even the Kamala's thought of the first time home buyer, you get an extra 25 grand in tax benefits. That just, I mean, it sounds nice, but then all of a sudden, as a seller of a home, you just up your price by 25 grand because it's just like those are the things that sound nice on paper, especially to an I don't want to say uneducated, but financially illiterate or financially uneducated person. And when you flesh it out in economics, it's like, well, that it just doesn't work, and it begins to erode even further the middle class, which goes back to our power question, where I think a lot of this is centered in power and a larger government. I'm someone that wants as small of a government as possible, give the rights to the states, and help the middle class grow. And I see these as directly opposed to that. I don't. I sure hope that this wouldn't go through because I think everybody could tell you it's a big mistake. But on paper, it's to those half of our country or maybe more that says, well, I don't have any unrealized gains. That's for the rich kind of people, and yet it very quickly comes back to bite you when tech jobs stop hiring, or you buy a house and it goes up and now you're taxed on it, or you make a good investment. Yeah, I think it's frankly one of the silliest kind of policies that's been presented
And
this time.
and what's interesting is that like the super wealthy have been vilified, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that you look at what some of these super wealthy people have done and can do. Um, I'll give you a couple examples. My first boss was Michael Milken at Drexel Burnham. My father passed away from prostate cancer at 57. When Milken developed prostate cancer, rather than going to 3, 4, 5 doctors, what he did to save his life is he built it like a venture capital firm. He basically put
Hmm.
2 million into this crazy idea, 500,000 here, 3 million here, 2 million here, and rather than put $100 million in the American Cancer Society, he built it like a venture capital. And because of Michael Milken, most men today will die with, but not of, prostate cancer. So here you've got an example of somebody who is a brilliant entrepreneur, who is who can think, who's solving some of these real world problems. You look at Eric Lefkowski, who lives right by me, who's one of the founders of Groupon. His wife developed breast cancer. He went to help his wife, and based on trying to help his wife, not to make money, but to help his wife,
Hmm.
he didn't like the data. And then as a result of that, a company called Tempest formed. And Tempest is now a publicly traded company. So I don't think that that it's a panacea, but I do think a lot of these family offices, and I do think a lot of these very wealthy people can move the needle because you can't run a charity exactly like a business, but you can and should run it much more business like. And everything's so binary, and we in society today, and everything's such sound bites. But if you really think about it, Sergey Brin has a predisposition for pancreatic cancer. He's donated $1 billion. Is he going to solve it? I don't know. Would I put my money on him over the American Cancer Society? In a heartbeat.
Every day, every day. That's a great story, and that's. I think that's beautiful. That's what has made this country great is innovation and um, Yeah, more of that.
Yeah, one of
I
the
think
things I
that's
also
that's a
find
great story. I didn't know
interesting,
that.
because we want to make sure that we're incentivizing the right behavior, but also incentivizing and flowing. Like I mentioned, in regards to opportunity zones, we saw a massive flood, and a lot of people took a lot of opportunity with those specific states or those specific regions throughout the U.S. Ron, I would like to ask, because you work with a lot of family offices, and we've got a lot of friends as well, and I'd love to understand what other opportunities that they like to see at a federal level that would like to be implemented, maybe through taxes, maybe through other different opportunity, situations, whatever it is, where we'd like to see more of a flood toward, and incentivizing the right behavior for these investors. And what I'm thinking about, like a beautiful example, what you just said, biotech and healthcare. There's a lot of money being, flowing in that direction, because people are just are passionate about that. But also, I think it'd be really cool to see how there's pre-existing opportunities and correct established incentives to increase that capital flow in those industries.
We live at a point in time right now. We're at an inflection point with artificial intelligence. So, as you know, the internet disrupted the whole world and it changed everything. Artificial intelligence is going to be even more disruptive than the internet. And there's going to be some bad actors. There's no question, because there always are. But I think there's going to also be a lot of really good things that happen, and particularly in things like healthcare, where you can look at the human genome and you could just do so much more stuff with artificial intelligence plugging in the data that you don't need humans to do. So I think that we're at a point where, with artificial intelligence, we are at an inflection point where we could really use a lot of this for good. But if you disincent people, they're not going to do it. So you have to figure out ways to incent people to create companies, to create businesses where they could be profitable, so they're incented to do it. As a result of that, they create more jobs. As a result of that, perhaps we could find a cure for prostate cancer. Perhaps we could find a cure for breast cancer, for different things. So I think artificial intelligence is a perfect example of, there's no question there's going to be bad things that happen. And there's also going to be good things that happen. But if you take away the
When
incentive for
you're
the good things to
when you're
happen,
looking at
they're not
AI
going to happen.
specifically, there's been a lot of
Well said.
startups and maybe some post-revenue companies that have come through our, on our desk, and we're underwriting them. But what I find so interesting in this market, it's hard to identify a defensible moat because things can be just so drastically pulled out so quickly. We're seeing AI and these AI companies, we're seeing actually in some of the investments that I have directly be competitors to some of the software companies I've invested into. And so that just shows to me, like, AI, like you just said, it is drastically changing and totally um, eradicating some businesses, which is a good thing, efficiency, productivity, whatever it is, that's awesome. But I'm realizing that, okay, the typical SaaS, I'm seeing the margins decrease. I'm just seeing there's a more of a competitive market now, because again, AI came in. When you're talking AI, are there certain investments that you have seen, and you maybe don't have to mention names, or the way, how do you navigate it as an investor in the AI? Thus far, we've kind of stayed on the sideline a little bit and just waiting for the dust to settle, and that's what I tend to do. But I'd love to get your perspective because, on how you're thinking about this as an investor.
Yeah, it's like when the internet came out, right? You knew it was going to change everything. You don't know how or in what capacity. You didn't know Facebook was going to be the winner, and some of these other companies were going to be losers. So I think it's still very early to pick the winners and the losers. I think the infrastructure part of it will be a big component of it. I think the biggest advantage, the biggest winner will be, I think, in the healthcare space, because I think that there's so many things that with artificial intelligence that we will be able to do. So we have to harness the good and incent entrepreneurs to create and build businesses to do that, to solve real world problems. And we live in a society now with sound bites where, you know, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class is eroding, and that is true, and that's not good. But there's a lot of good things that can happen from very philanthropic entrepreneurs who can run these philanthropies
Well
much more
said.
like a
Go
business.
ahead, Andrew.
And to me, that's my North Star.
I mean, it's good. It brings to mind for me, like when the internet came out, you never would have guessed that. I mean, I'm sitting here going, what's the most successful internet company? And I would probably argue it's probably Google over Facebook or anything like that. Who would have thought, when it's petsandflowers.com, that a search engine is going to be like the goal, like that's going to be really the solution or the business case for using the internet. So I totally agree. I think we're super early in that. I think blockchain is another really interesting technology that is similar to, like, oh my gosh, the internet, and what does the internet do? You have a web page. When 10, 15 years later, the internet is like, it's integrated into all of society. It's not just a web page. And so I'm interested to see how blockchain kind of filters and saturates the world economy as a whole, not from cryptocurrency or anything like that, but from these dynamic ledgers, whether it's healthcare, whether it's food production, things like that. I'm excited to see where AI or even a combination of blockchain and AI together. I agree. I think both are in the first inning of how these implement society or impact society.
I was at a conference at Stanford University, and the person who spoke right before me had a picture of a fire, picture of a wheel, the word internet, and the word artificial intelligence. And what they're saying is, as transformative as fire was for society, or the wheel was, or the internet, that's how transformative that AI is going to be for society. And I don't know how exactly it's going to play out. I just do know that there will clearly be bad actors and bad things will happen. That's just the way humans are wired. But I'm also very much an optimistic person, and I do believe that there will be so much good that comes from it, and we have to figure out ways to harness that. And that's
Yeah.
to me why I'm so optimistic.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when I begin to look at an AI company, I think one of the first questions to ask, going back to Christian's question about a moat, is, okay, so you can analyze, using artificial intelligence. The question becomes very quickly, what are you analyzing, or what is your data set that you own? And for me, that's kind of the very initial trash or keep it on your desk when you're analyzing the company is what is their data set? How protected is that? Ron, have you seen companies that have kind of had, oh, we have AI as a buzzword, and then others that say, well, hey, we have this core data set. There's one that was looking at, it was a year and a half ago, so it was a little bit earlier. They were based out of Seattle. It was a venture company that had like robots that would go through a field and zap weeds on crops, and it was cool because you didn't have to use pesticides and this and that. But the data set it was an image classifier where you had all of this data that was like, this is a weed, this is a crop. And so from that aspect, I'm like, okay, that's a great use of AI because you're using it to, in real time, say, that's a weed, let's zap it with a laser and move on. And now the crop is more productive versus I'm using AI to do X, Y, and Z, but I don't own this data set. Have you seen similar stuff?
Well, remember in the late '90s, before the bubble burst, you just slapped on the word .com on anything you did. So you're a football company, it's .com. You make toothpaste, you're .com, and that's what everybody did. And I see that's what's happening with AI. So many of these companies, they've bastardized it and they've used it as a marketing thing. And so a lot of people, and that's just the way the world is.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is optics. A lot of people will say AI so they can get better valuations, et cetera. And a lot of these valuations are crazy right now. But I do think that even though they gamify it like they did with the .com bubble and now they're doing with AI, there are real things that are going to come out of this that are going to be fundamentally change the way diseases are impacted and cured, and there will be a tremendous amount of benefit for society for it. But yeah, I mean, right now, you get the good guys, you get the bad guys. You know,
Yeah, I
hopefully the
love
good
that,
guys
man. And
win,
I've
and
seen
there's
so
more
many
good
things.
than
You're
bad
so
that comes
right
out.
on that. And the valuations of just putting AI beside your name, dude, it's like it has another 20, $30 billion. You're like, okay, cool, whatever it is. And it's the funniest thing to me. It just cracks me up. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Oh, what? Oh, is this AI? Okay, well, whatever, man. And we tend to pass on it. Now, let me ask you this because I want to dive into this antitrust thing because I'm a capitalist at heart. I love capitalism, but I also understand that you have to rein in some companies, right? Because all of a sudden they become too powerful. You saw this during the Rockefeller region, and the I think it's important. And so even though you're a capitalism, you also have to understand the power of big business. And so Google lost an antitrust law just recently by the DOJ. They're going after them again now. DOJ's second antitrust trial against Google begins Monday in Virginia court, this time after Google's ad platform. And the ad platform represents almost $200 billion of their market cap. $200 billion digital ads company. They've been basically acquiring tons of digital ad tools underneath them for many, many years. And what's interesting is the DOJ, or excuse me, the Federal Trade Commission filed an antitrust lawsuit against Facebook. That was in 2007 in 2020, excuse me. They've also did it against FTC, and 17 states sued Amazon, allegedly wielding its monopoly power to inflate prices, degrading quality for shoppers unlawfully. And they're kind of doing the same thing with the DOJ, Google. And Google did lose it against the DOJ just recently. This one now is coming back up with um, on Monday just recently. And so I'm curious because even though I'm a capitalist, I have a hard time with this conversation. One, because it's like, I understand that the competition is important because it means that just like we were talking about AI and SaaS, right? Now all of a sudden AI is coming in and it's a competitor to SaaS models, and now SaaS has to basically say, okay, how are we going to defend this? How are we going to get a better offer, get a better product to keep our customers, to get more customers, right? It's good. It's good for the market. It keeps everything on the toes. And when you have stagnation, then that's when all of a sudden you can control the market, etc. And so I look at Facebook, and I look at Amazon, I look at all these larger companies, and there is this amazing customer first approach where they have an amazing product and they just add so much value. And it's not by luck or chance or even through government influence that they've acquired the massive market penetration that they have. But also at some point, they have so much power that they can manipulate. And so I am curious, where do you stand on this? When you're looking at this kind of stuff that's happening, do you think it's appropriate for the DOJ to go after Google in this case, and specifically the FTC went after an Amazon and Meta? Do you feel like that's appropriate, or do you feel like that they're overstepping their boundaries on this?
I need to pause for 1 minute. So this isn't being done live. You could edit this, right?
Yes, and we'll edit this here. But Andrew, obviously I'll go to you as well. But I'm because I've heard these conversations before, and I think it's important to rein in these companies sometimes. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts when we're discussing this, Andrew?
I'm torn between, I think at the point where it becomes, if I was sitting on a jury or something like that, I would approach this from an aspect of, is there the desire for manipulation? And that's really where my question becomes, like, at what point does the government
Sorry.
step in?
I got to take I thought this was going to end at 9. I've got a 9 o'clock call. I can
Yeah, that's no
like
worries.
that. I
No
can go
worries.
back at 9:30 in a half an hour if that works for you guys.
Yeah, or we could just go another 5 minutes. I mean, I'm super appreciative of your time, Ron.
Yeah, I got it. I just got to take this call. So you could plug and play. Where we stop. But let's
That's good, Ron.
jump back on at 9. Let's jump back on in a half an hour.
Okay, sounds good, man.
Okay.
I've got a 10:30, but so my question about this becomes: at what point does the government, and are we allowing or okay with the government taking control and interfering? I think is a good word with private business. I'm a small government kind of guy. I also I think that the place of the government for something like this comes when there's a manipulation aspect, there's an influence aspect of, whether it's Facebook suppressing the Russian laptop, Hunter Biden's laptop, which is proven now, and Zuckerberg admits to it. At that point, I have a big issue with it. If it's purely based on money and market penetration, I think let them run. But when it becomes, well, I have this market penetration, now I can manipulate, now I can stack the deck in my favor. I think everyone tries to stack the deck in their favor as they grow, right? So I don't think that in a capitalistic society to say, oh my goodness, you took advantage of the advantages that you had. Well, that's what everyone does, and that's how any business grows, right? So it becomes for me a question of, are you seeking manipulation? Is there malice intent behind this? From a pure business standpoint, I really don't have a problem with successful companies becoming more successful and being the market standard for something. What I do have an issue with are those companies that then use that power and influence to manipulate. We talked about the issues between the two-party system. Could we have an independent? No, because there's too much money involved, right? Money corrupts. The same thing happens here of going, hey, buddy, you got this great business, your market penetration. Can you kind of push this agenda? Can you push this kind of stuff? That's where I take issue with it. I don't take issue with a big company being big and doing great and buying up their competitors. And I think that's capitalistic at its nature. And I would say, stay out of it kind of thing. That's where my small government's like, I don't want you involved with my business. The point where I would say go get them, government, is when there's this manipulation, right? Does there need to be a policing because you're basically swaying public interest? You could call it propaganda, you could call it pushing certain views, what have you. That's where I take issue with it. I don't take issue when it's a money issue. Oh my gosh, they're the monsters in the space, et cetera. I think what's also interesting is it wasn't. I think it was Rockefeller where he was allegedly playing golf the day that the antitrust suit came out, and they were going to have to break up Standard Oil. And he told everyone that he was with, like, buy every share you can get of all of these different separate companies. He's like, and they're like, are you kidding? You just lost the case. And he's like, you're going to make more money that, your great grandchildren will never have to work again. And so part of me is sitting here going, all right, if they do break up Google and I can, or Amazon, and I can buy shares of AWS, it's like, let's back the truck up kind of thing. So do antitrust lawsuits work? I think is a whole nother conversation, because it's not like I'm killing your business. I'm just saying, well, we're going to break your business apart. They're still the market leaders. They're still super well capitalized, all of that. The issue becomes influence and manipulation of the public, which is why, I've always been a big fan of Elon, but to come in and to basically not empty his piggy bank, but $44 billion to buy Twitter, that's a pretty big piggy bank, to protect free speech, right? I don't want the herd to be manipulated in a way that's unfair or biased. I love that. I think that's a cause that's worth championing. And so that's where I come in and say, if it's big business, that's fine.
Example,
if it's
and
big
I'm so glad that this
manipulation,
information came out.
that's totally different.
Elon Musk did not buy Twitter, then that information would not have come out. And then, of course, as you can see, now we're 90 days out from the election. Zuckerberg actually mentioned and wrote a letter and said, hey, to the congressman, and said, hey, look, yes, we were manipulated on this, and we were kind of, censoring COVID information to on our platforms. And that is a concern, because as you can see, and YouTube, and you think about it as a content creator, you have a podcast, whatever it may be, and we just recently seen Candace Owens just get pushed off of YouTube. And why is that important? Because is that a targeted thing? Now, I do know she says some outlandish things, but my point is, at a macro level, look, these platforms have huge immense power. on their algorithm basis on what information is pushed and what information is not. Hence what we just saw with Mark Zuckerberg and what he just basically did. Well, yes, we did actually censor or limit the information that went out there, and that is a concern. And I think that's what the conversation is. But also I see this in Europe a little bit. So you see Meta or Google or whatever it may be, and you see the European Union, and all they do is fine these large organizations of hundreds of billions of dollars or whatever it may be. Maybe they lose the case, but is there anything effectively established outside of just getting a fine? Okay, you got $75 billion. Wonderful. There's a fine. That goes back to the government. And so my question now is the government just pursuing this just to pad their pockets, right? Or is it actually saying, hey, look, there's actually going to be something that we're going to be pushing through at a macro level to, like you said, to push them into smaller entities. But at the end of the day, even if you do that, is that beneficial? Is that actually helping? Or is that just more, again, a political jargon and saying, yeah, we did it. Look at us. We, accomplished us. When the reality is, just like you said, you look at Rockefeller and all of a sudden, boom, all these other companies are still multi-billion dollar, and they were able to scale, and now they became actually more effective and efficient because they're a smaller capacity. So it is a very interesting dichotomy right now and a paradigm, and that's why I tend to go back and forth a little bit on this. I say, look, I understand the importance of it, and having government come into play this and being kind of the, and this is also what I see a little bit, because you have to understand, see. There was always this assumption that government is good and will work on your behalf. And sometimes what we've seen recently is that the government and these larger organizations are in bed together. And that's really what a really big concern to me. So when I see this DOJ stuff, I don't put too much emphasis on it. I look at it as more like the government's just trying to pad their pocket and making it look like, the Biden administration is going after them and we're doing something, bad tech. And reality is, okay, we fine them for $50 billion, whatever it is, or $75 billion. And okay, cool. And these companies, they make so much god awful money, $50 billion, that's just operating expense, man. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And they have enough funds that just outlay this. So I think you're right on this, because now that this evidence has come by, we have to look at this holistically and say, is this just a political move? And a lot of the times I think it's just a political move and there's no actual action that's going to be taken. And it is sad to see how there's enough evidence behind that. Andrew, always a pleasure chatting with you and talking about antitrust, talking about the, Trump and Kamala Harris shenanigans. Obviously, on October 1st, the VPs, JD Vance and Tim Waltz, they're going to be, on the debate stage. So we're going to have to talk about that and, unpack that a little bit. But Andrew, I appreciate you being on here, bud. Yeah, it was great to just unpack and think about what he's.
Pleasure.
And it's interesting
that the
position he's in, because you can tell he's an independent. He likes Trump's economic policies, but he just doesn't like him as a person. He doesn't like Kamala Harris. And so he's like, are these the two best? And I'm like, you know what? I love Trump no matter what. I think, no matter what, I think it's going to be beneficial. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing, like I mentioned, a lot of people becoming more, spoken, talking about how they're supporting Trump this time around, specifically in the, Silicon Valley, Palo Alto area. And I don't think there's no other reasoning other than that he's economically aligned with all those investors. And I think that just makes perfect sense. You see Elon Musk coming out, you see David Sachs coming out, you see Chamath even backing him as well. So I don't think there's a coincidence behind it. It's very simple. But Andrew, it's a pleasure having Ron on there. But until next time, guys, appreciate it, bud. Cheers.
Thanks.